My name is Philippe Simet. I'm a philosopher and I'm interested in what architecture tells us about lifestyles. I'd like to introduce you to the most singular homes on the planet to discover their meaning and share in their riches. In the Netherlands, half of the country lies below sea level, and 1/3 is covered by water, either canals, lakes, or rivers. Since the Middle Ages, the Dutch have used their inventiveness to reclaim land from the sea by building so-called polders on which 60% of Dutch people live. Some feat when you find out that the Netherlands is the European nation with the densest population for its size. But today, while space is still lacking, a new threat hangs over the country. Global warming is causing the seas and major rivers to rise, endangering dikes and threatening to flood the country. The Dutch have found a new solution. Rather than hold back water, why not live on it? Eight kilometers from the center of Amsterdam, in the new district of IJburg, composed of artificial islands, a group of floating homes has been springing up since 2013. Having lived for 7 years in downtown Amsterdam, Rico and Sitske moved to Waterbert, a floating neighborhood in IJburg with 90 houses and 300 inhabitants. 5 years ago, the structure of their house was delivered by boat from the Urk shipyard. Since then, Rico has been patiently furbishing the interior. Hello.
Hello.
Can I come in?
Sure, I'm Rico.
How are you doing? Wow, you're hard at work.
Yes, we're at the finishing stage. We had a leak, but I fixed it. I still have some plaques to put up and to plaster. Then I'll install the underfloor central heating, and this will be our living room.
You're doing everything by yourself?
I've always dreamed of building my own home. So yes, I'm doing everything myself. At night, if I had a dream and came up with an idea, I'd spring out of bed, go straight to the computer and draw a plan or modify an existing plan. I drew at least 200 plans. It was a long process of fine-tuning.
I guess it was pretty impressive, seeing your home arrive by boat.
It was a huge moment, a unique experience. The house was in a huge wooden crate, which was towed by a tugboat.
These floating houses are still very much experimental.
Yes. Even the local authorities were unsure of how to apply construction regulations. So they just took the construction standards for a normal house and transposed them, adding boathouse.
With his desire to constantly adapt his home to the constraints of water, Rico embodies the pioneer spirit of the Dutch. It's as if the dream of a floating home hasn't yet come true.
We had the dream, but the problems came later, just after we'd signed the contract. In the end, we've had a lot of problems, but we still believe in our dreams and we keep going, because at some point, well, there's no turning back.
Rico's wife, Sitska, shows me around the lower part of their three-story house. It's a lot cooler down here than upstairs.
Yes, it's nice and cool, particularly on warm evenings.
Because this part's in the water.
Yes, the water comes up to here. Do you want to see?
Oh, right. We're under the water level. It's great to see the boats. It's quite stable now, but does the house ever move?
Yeah, it can shake quite a bit. Today's fine as there's no wind, but when it's windy, as it often is in IJburg, we bounce all over the place. Sometimes it can even knock us off our feet. I love it. When it's stormy outside, it's really exciting.
All the houses are the same size and have the same external architecture. Cubes with big windows and an upstairs terrace. But each owner has the freedom to use the materials and layout of his or her choice. Pontoon bridges lined with flowers and bicycles provide access to the homes, while the boats moored alongside evoke the nautical activities that go hand in hand with this new way of life. It's amazing to see a pylon in the middle of the lake.
Yes. Lots of people complain about the pylon, mostly about the possible waves. But I kind of find it beautiful. It's a nice construction.
Like a sculpture in the middle of the lake.
Not all the houses here are floating. Many of them have concrete foundations, 7 by 10 meters, and between 1.8 and 2.7 meters high. The concrete block sinks 1.5 meters into the bed, so the foundation is as deep as possible. It needs to be as deep as possible because if the mass rises, the house becomes unstable. So you must have a maximum of mass underwater, and it's the concrete block that supplies the maximum mass. The pillars ensure the block doesn't rise vertically and doesn't shift horizontally, so it remains very stable. There are 2 pillars, one there and one here. So when it's very windy, the house moves only up and down and not side to side.
Can you swim?
There you can see how high the house is from the pillars. 2 years ago, the water rose very high around this house. It was almost detached from its pillars and risked floating off.
Hello. Looks like you want to go for a swim. The interesting thing is, it's not just a question of floating homes, but a new lifestyle. Your leisure activities actually become part of your daily life.
Yes, exactly. We're much freer to live our lives on the water. Lots of people go for boat rides, go for a swim, go windsurfing, just to enjoy the water. There's a new kind of combination between the home and leisure time. I really like that. It suits me totally.
Ik voel me er helemaal thuis bij.
Koen Olthaus is an architect and an advocate of life on the water as a solution for the future of the Netherlands. He insisted on taking me up to the skies to discover the lay of the land and to better understand the current mindset, which is to stop constantly fighting against water and to turn it into an ally by letting it into the land and imagining new ways of living. We've already taken off.
Green, man. Really green.
Is that reclaimed land or not?
We're flying over Almere.
Is that reclaimed land or not?
We're flying over Almere, one of the newest planned cities built completely on reclaimed land. To the left, you can see Lake IJssel. Before it was part of the sea. So we're flying over the biggest artificial island in the world. It's amazing.
What's really amazing is that almost all of the Netherlands is built on reclaimed land.
We Dutch have been fighting water for centuries. Really, we started centuries ago. And over time, half of the Netherlands has been built on reclaimed land. A landscape of 4,000 polders, which we must pump out every day to keep the land dry. It's awesome. What amazes me is that my parents, my grandparents, and all those before them were aware that water was a problem and that they had to do something to fight against it. Now, today's generation has forgotten that. They think the Netherlands is dry, but they really need to go back in time. Firstly, because it took an enormous amount of work to drain the polders and then keep them dry. And secondly, there's a lot of work to be done for the future.
Regarding the future, will you keep building polders?
Yes, because the land changes all the time. Before it was like a sponge that could be either soaked, either dry. When we started farming, we preferred to have the polders dry. And the polders on which Dutch people live to be totally dry. We must always check the levels of water we need to pump out and how high our dikes need to be. With climate change, the sea level is rising. That has an important effect on our dikes in keeping back the water. We need to pump more water out because we have heavier and heavier rains. When you take all that into account, it means we'll never manage with our present system. We need to take new steps towards the future, perhaps with a polder 2.0.
Seen from the sky, you realize how the landscape has been fashioned by man. The polders are organized according to a rational plan laid out in rectangles. This geometrical landscape is fascinating because it testifies to the desire of man, like King Canute, to keep back the invading waves. What's amazing is, in a single generation, the landscape can completely change.
I think the next generation will see a lot of changes brought about by industry and urbanization, but also because we're starting to view the polders differently. We're starting to accept the presence of water. Our rivers are becoming wider, our canals too, and our polders are starting to retain more water. The upcoming generation will have to think up new ways of inhabiting them. 50 years from now, the Netherlands will probably look completely different. Maybe what it looked like 50 years ago.
East of Rotterdam is the country's oldest polder, Kinderdijk. Now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it has existed since the 17th century with its system of 19 pumping windmills standing alongside each other. The windmills are still inhabited and in working order, but these days, electric pumps empty the polder by draining out water first into the surrounding canals, then into the sea. A low ecology system that consumes lots of energy, but without which the region would be flooded within 48 hours. Here, living on dry land comes at an exorbitant cost due to climate change and the need to preserve natural resources. That's why Kuhn Oldhouse is now focused on floating architecture. It's high time we question the homes in which we currently live, which use up space and energy, and replace them with a more fluid, more mobile architecture.
For centuries, the Netherlands has been reshaped, and we used to seeing landscapes constantly change due to all kinds of influences. I believe we've applied to these buildings the notion that everything is permanently changing.
In IJburg, I saw some very interesting floating homes, but architecturally still a bit basic. So I imagine there's still a lot of room for improvement.
That's right. IJburg was designed 10 years ago. They were the first floating homes in one of the first floating districts. Since then, we've made huge progress. We're now building houses with gardens, and they're reachable by car, like with homes on dry land. We always try to go farther. I'm curious to know where we'll be in 5 or 10 years' time. You're right to say it's a work in progress. With each step, we go even further. IJburg is in fact a long stalk with homes attached to it. I think our ideas are now going a lot further. So if you ask me what will happen here in the future, I'd say that some of the houses will disappear. A lot more floating gardens will be added, so it'll be greener. Or the houses will stay put and a lot more facilities will be added, like a floating movie theater, or a floating grocery store, or a floating school. Floating facilities which in 5 or 10 years can be moved from place to place, are removed and replaced with others. We need to think about functional flexibility. When talking about the new towns which will be built on water in 5 or 10 years' time, the houses themselves might be displaceable, giving even more flexibility. And they won't be single detached houses, but long terraces, which will create new canals. In a way, we're putting together a big jigsaw puzzle. And why are we doing that? Because the needs of a city are constantly changing.
In IJburg, I discover a second lot of floating houses, all strictly identical and built with prefabricated materials: concrete, chipboard, and PVC. The standardization of these homes makes them financially accessible to families seeking space and nature in a district with stores, services, and transport just a few minutes by bike from the city center. March decided to move here when her daughter was born 4 years ago. Hi, I'm Philippe.
Hi, I'm Marge.
Hi there. I was in another part of Verticale before, and it was very different. Here, all the houses are identical.
Yes, that's true. Over the other side, it's a free development area for some people. They can design their home with an architect. Whereas here, it's called experimental construction, and it's designed by a single architect. He designed the whole district so everything looks alike. We couldn't afford one of the houses over there. The experimental constructions are somewhat cheaper. Also, the houses at the end of the pier have an open view, which makes them more expensive than those close to the quayside.
Do you think that these similar, connected homes facilitate neighborhood life?
Firstly, we all live close together. Secondly, we all have common interests because we've opted for this type of house, which is a bit out of the ordinary. Another thing is we nearly all have children, which is surprising, because you might not expect that on the water. And finally, the neighborhood is the ideal size. When you live on a normal street with 100 other people, you might never get to know them. But in a close-knit district like this one, with 18 to 20 houses per pier, it makes you want to get to know people.
Living on water is quite a peculiar thing. Can you tell me why you chose to do so?
We were living in the center of Amsterdam and we were looking to buy a house outside the city. But we couldn't find anything we really liked. Then one day we saw these floating houses and we said, wow, they're really great. We thought we would really enjoy living in one. And it's so special that when you live here, you always feel it's a bit different to living in a standard house. I think there'll be more and more floating homes in the future. I don't think everyone will want one. There are a lot of people with kids who think we can't possibly live in a floating house. But we're in search of space in the Netherlands, and we don't have enough of it. So the only way to find it, or one of the ways to find it, is on the water. And that's something we don't lack. So I think there'll be more and more floating homes.
Is that an artificial lake?
It's a lake now, but it used to be the sea. The land stopped there, and this was the sea. So we've reclaimed more land, and now this is a lake. This is the old part of Amsterdam. Everything opposite us is new. It dates from about 10 years ago. But where we are now is several hundred years old. It's the edge of old Amsterdam.
It's crazy to think the land used to stop here, and all this was reclaimed afterwards. It seems like it's always existed.
For sure, it seems strange, but that's part of Amsterdam's history.
Wow! What in the world? What was that?
A weird bike, huh?
Seriously. The priority was to finish the kitchen first?
Sure. It's the most important part of a home. You've got to eat, right? So it's very important.
The water makes you feel like you're always on vacation, especially on sunny days when there's a light breeze and the ripples reflect onto the house and you can hear the ducks on the water.
I was hungry. A lot of people live on water, especially in Holland. But I get the feeling that living on water has another significance.
We have a lot of urban projects that pay tribute to the water and in which land is retreating to rebuild aquatic zones. I think it's wonderful because it's truly part of our culture. The Dutch work on aquatic projects all over the world, constructing polders, islands and so on. I see it as a play between water and land and how you can work with the two. I think it's great to have water available so we can live this way.
Today, the Dutch seem intent on letting water in rather than continually repelling it. Instead of fighting against the sea, the time has come to build together with it. The floating houses of IJburg are perhaps the sign of a new way of living of which the Dutch are the forerunners. As they have always managed in the past, they are adapting and innovating with these homes, which, born of a constraint, are a new, rather hedonistic way of living on water, blending home and leisure. My name's Philippe Simet. I'm a philosopher, and I'm interested in what architecture can tell us about our lifestyles. I'll take you to explore some of the most remarkable habitats on the planet in order to discover their meaning and to share their riches. Located in the heart of industrial Lombardy, in northern Italy, Milan is one of the most polluted cities in Europe. It's also one of the least green, with only 4% of parks and gardens. A derisory percentage when you consider the ecological challenges Italy is facing today. To curb this problem, Milan has decided to reintroduce nature into the city, and in a rather spectacular way. A few kilometers away from the city center, next to a vast field of wheat of 5,000 square meters, planted in the city like an island of greenery, stand two vegetal towers, similar to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. This is the Bosco Verticale, a project designed by architect Stefano Boeri and inaugurated in 2014 in the Porta Nuova district. Whereas 90% of towers are covered in metal and glass, this was the first time vegetation material was used for architectural purposes in high-rise buildings. Imagine no fewer than 800 trees, 4,500 bushes, and 15,000 plants spread over 400 terraces, the equivalent of 2 hectares of forest, only vertical. Genuine green lungs in the heart of the metropolis, the Bosco Verticale is a large-scale experiment in eco-landscaping architecture which integrates biodiversity into the building. A technological and ecological feat that's unique in the world. How were these skyscrapers, a blend of habitat and nature, constructed? And how do they work? What do the apartments look like? And what is it like behind this green curtain? Hello, Simona.
Hello, Philippe. How are you?
Good, thanks for seeing me.
I'm delighted to welcome you here in the most beautiful skyscraper in the world. It was given this title in 2014 by the jury of a very prestigious prize. Come, I'll show you around.
Merci.
We'll go up to the 14th floor out of 26. There are 26 floors altogether.
Okay, let's go. Simona Pizzi, one of the first residents here, has offered to show me her apartment.
This is my son, Andrea.
Hello.
Hello, Andrea. Nice to meet you.
Same here.
He's the boy of the house.
Yes.
Wow.
Welcome to our home.
I'm surprised at how bright it is, because when you see all those trees from the outside, you'd think it would be darker inside.
It's bright because the trees are planted on the outside of the terrace, and they grow laterally. So there's a big open space in front.
What made you want to live here? The building itself or the Bosco Verticale project in general?
We like the idea of having trees at home while also living in an ultra-technological environment, in a city as dynamic and fast-paced as Milan, but with greenery on our terraces. Here's the terrace where we have lunch.
And breakfast?
Right. There are lots of flowers, white ones, yellow ones.
It's gorgeous. There are lots of different species of trees and plants.
There are lots of other species on the other terrace, too.
Oh yes, they've all got the same. Every terrace has different plants.
Yes, they're different plants.
That's awesome.
Look how big this tree is.
Amazing. It's pretty high up. Don't you get vertigo?
No, not at all.
It's funny because there's a lot of talk about these towers. Some people say they're not very human places to live in, notably because of the height. But when you're up here, surrounded by all this greenery, it makes the environment very human.
It's true that when you're out on the terrace, you feel very safe, even though you're high up, because the greenery gives the impression that you're at ground level. And we live alongside our neighbors in a totally normal, natural way. Let me show you the other side.
Oh, right. The trees we see here are growing on the floor below.
Yes, it's not our terrace, but it feels like it, because the trees grow up to here, and we can also see them. This is our bedroom. And here there's another terrace.
Oh, yes? Really?
Looking onto the other tower, which is smaller.
Oh, yes. There are terraces everywhere.
Yes.
It's marvelous. With a sofa to sit on.
Everything has blossomed right now, so it's very beautiful. Plus, there's a view on the other tower. The first thing I do every morning is open the window and contemplate the vegetation to see how it changes from season to season. Can you feel the breeze? Other than the northern-facing terrace, there are lots of angles, and you can smell the fresh air. Whereas most skyscrapers have air conditioners, which isn't very natural. Here, you feel like you're living in the open air.
In the Bosco, each inhabitant has 2 trees, 8 bushes, and 20 plants selected from 100 different species. It was the agronomist, landscapist Laura Gatti who planted and grew all of the greenery that make up the Bosco Verticale. This specialist on inner-city nature has been working on urban revitalization and the development of green spaces for over 20 years. Without her, this incredible project would never have seen the light of day. Bosco Verticale is an architectural and landscaping feat that's unique in the world because it was the first time living trees were used on a high-rise's facade. Don't you have to be a bit nuts to start a project like that?
Nuts? No. We simply stretched the limits that had been used in other projects. But this was a very interesting multidisciplinary project, which lasted 3 years, during which technicians, engineers, and installers all put their work at the service of the trees, and that required a lot of studies and research. For example, one fundamental piece of data came to us at the start of the project from a wind tunnel test at the Polytechnic School of Milan. It indicated the places where it was possible to plant trees. And it also gave very positive results, because it also made us realize how trees would attract breezes that would flow around the buildings.
You tested the tree's wind resistance, but I guess there were other criteria, like sunlight, and regulating the growth of the trees, which mustn't grow too tall or they'd weaken the tower's structure.
The main criterion concerned the adaptability to the overall conditions, to growth, and to growing in pots and boxes. What's more, we had to respect the original idea of the architect, Stefano Bori, who envisioned more of a wood than a traditional garden or a neighborhood park. So we chose trees that looked as natural as possible. Then we chose where to plant them according to their height and exposure. The facades of both towers are oriented to the 4 cardinal points: north, east, south, and west, so they benefit from very precise sunlight. This is the north facade. On the north facade, there are plants which, in nature, live in the shelter of other plants. Whereas on the south facade, we planted more typically Mediterranean species, such as holm oaks and olive trees.
In recent years, we've seen more and more vegetal walls appearing in architecture. But here, in Bosco Verticale, you've gone much further because you're using trees. Does that have a truly different ecological impact?
The facade of Bosco Verticale is made up of 12,000 square meters of greenery, but it's very dense, very developed. Trees have lots of leaves, so they can absorb a lot more pollutants and fine particles than plants you usually find on terraces.
So the towers play an ecological function in the neighborhood in terms of biodiversity.
Right from the beginning, the system was designed to be a home for all forms of life. Bipeds, or humans, of course, but also useful insects, like bees and butterflies, and birds. And from that point of view, the result has gone way beyond our expectations. Nature is fundamental to inner city life. We know we can do it, and we must continue in this vein. We have no other choice but to continue along these lines in the future.
At Bosco Verticale, the greenery is solely tended by the estate management. The sprinkler system is automatic, but the regular maintenance of this vertical forest isn't easy because pruning has to be done on the very facades of the towers. Specialist arborists with a profound knowledge of the trees and plants of the Bosco Verticale, have had to learn how to abseil from the top of the two towers, which are 76 and 112 meters high respectively. A task as spectacular as it is dangerous, carried out twice a year. The inhabitants aren't allowed to water the plants or prune the trees, or to introduce new species, so as to not interfere with the ecosystem of the towers. The trees of Bosco Verticale were grown for 2 years in a nursery before being hoisted up by cranes to the terraces, then planted in large boxes that can contain up to 5 cubic meters of earth. The complexity behind this engineering is fascinating. There's a perfect blend of vegetation and construction materials, as if the towers were acting as a fulcrum between nature and architecture. René, as an arborist, is it different working on a tower like this one?
This is a really exceptional situation. I think it's the first time in the world, certainly in Italy, that an arborist has to work like this, abseiling down 2 ropes. But it's really interesting and stimulating work. Actually, I was born and raised in this district, but it was totally different back then. It was a working-class neighborhood. I hadn't lived in Milan for 25 years, but I recently moved back here and found that my old district had completely changed. It was working-class, poor, run-down, and I discovered an ultra-modern district with high-rise buildings, and especially these 2 towers, the Bosco Verticale.
Were there green spaces like this?
No, there was wasteland, but no green spaces.
This is the reintroduction of nature into the city.
Yes, vertically, but yes. Okay, my life's in your hands.
Okay, I'm letting you go.
No, just give me some slack. Look at her. She wanted to drop me.
All this technology in the service of the biodiversity impresses me, but it also leaves me slightly perplexed. How do you make people more aware and teach them about good urban green practices when nature isn't in the hands of the inhabitants, like at the towers? When green spaces are scarce, it's by growing plants on our balconies or by gardening on our terraces that we get back in touch with the vegetal world. These ordinary practices not only meet our need for nature, they also teach us to take greater care for it. Not everyone agrees about the towers. They were built on land that was often frequented by the people of Isola, a working-class district close to Porta Nuova. The opponents of the Bosco Verticale criticize its exorbitant construction costs. To them, these luxury high-rises symbolize the privatization of nature, reserved for wealthy homeowners. Bert Thijs, the founder of Isola Pepi Verde, a collective of artists and activists, believes the reintroduction of nature into urban areas should take a different form. Bert, hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
Great, thanks. It's amazing here in the Isola district. We're not far from the towers, but you get the feeling of being in a completely different world.
That's a completely natural feeling because this is the precise point where 2 worlds meet. One is an old industrial district, which was full of workers, craftsmen, and even criminals. It's the district of Isola. The other world is the new district of Porta Nuova, part of which was constructed in Isola and the other part in other districts. And this tension has generated contradictions in this neighborhood that is in full transformation.
Yes, but the Bosco Verticale has brought the equivalent of a hectare of forest into the city.
It hasn't brought the forest into the neighborhood, though, because no one can go mushroom collecting in the Bosco Verticale. It's totally inaccessible. All that vegetation is for the privileged few, those with enough money to buy an apartment here.
So the question of nature in the city isn't just a question of the amount of greenery. It's more a question of having green spaces that are accessible to a much wider public.
Exactly. That's the real problem. And it's the reason why we got together to find an alternative place that belongs to the city of Milan. We found it here, on the Via Pepe, and we turned it into an allotments garden, which isn't just a green space, but a place for social and cultural exchange.
On what was once urban wasteland, there are now allotments where people can grow plants, flowers, and vegetables among the weeds. Open to everyone, the garden also welcomes local inhabitants and the children of the neighboring kindergarten, who can observe how nature changes with the seasons and learn the basics of urban gardening. It's wonderful here, with this wild garden. Ah, raspberries.
We're planning to expand over the neighboring parking lot. We'll be like a virus, spreading throughout the city and changing everything. It's a very ambitious project.
This place is telling me that urban nature isn't just a question of green spaces, but of knowing how to share it and how to work it together. Despite its critics, the Bosco Verticale is still very innovative. These residential towers address both high-density problems and urban revegetation through habitat. The reforestation of towers seems to be one of the most fertile paths to follow in regenerating the city. But is such an architectural experiment possible elsewhere? Stefano Bori, the architect-designer of Bosco Verticale, is convinced it is.
In the future, in metropolises and cities, not only in Europe, but across the planet, we'll have to seriously take verticality into account. We can't continually keep clearing away nature and occupying farmland. We have to stop thinking that a city can endlessly laterally expand. We must think of a city growing within its existing boundaries. Basically, we're used to maintaining a relationship with trees and nature only in the suburbs and in the countryside. But we can have it in the city by growing vertically and providing 2 hectares of woodland in a tiny, little 1,500 square meters.
Today, the Bosco Verticale is an experiment put into practice. But do you think it could easily be reproduced in other cities?
Certainly. Firstly, because the technical research and development has been made available to everyone. And I think the Bosco Verticale could be used for social housing. It's what we're working on right now in China, for families with very low incomes.
The Bosco Verticale is a possible solution. But do you think there are other alternatives?
The main thing is to create a new relationship between nature, agriculture, and the city. Agriculture is cultivated nature, anthropomorphized nature. What we're doing here is more agriculture than nature. We've generated totally produced vegetation, planned, worked, and maintained. Nature and animal species need to be able to live without human intervention. The big challenge in the coming years will be to imagine an architecture and a city that are non-anthropocentric. We should no longer see mankind as the sole protagonist on the pedestal of life. It's an extraordinary challenge that we must pay attention to with great care and without hypocrisy.
Like all large cities in the world, Milan is at a crossroad. It could continue to grow and absorb all arable lands, or it can decide to establish a new relationship between the city and the natural world. The vegetal towers of the Bosco Verticale and the communal garden of Isola, Pepe Verde, are two possibilities, very different on paper, but not far apart in reality. For one thing is certain today, we can't go on living in anti-nature cities. It's crucial that we reintroduce nature into our cities so we can live in a healthier environment, rediscover the rhythm of the seasons, and become more aware of the fragility of our ecosystem, which has been harmed by modern urbanism. It's an essential aspect of our lives as city dwellers that is no longer possible to ignore.